Moving forward, we have a question from 2014. The question reads as, consider the following statements. Animal Welfare Board of India is established under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. National Tiger Conservation Authority is a statutory body. National Ganga River Basin Authority is chaired by the Prime Minister. So now, let's have a look at the content related to it. First of all, understand in India, you do have a clear classification between your wild animals, animals that occur in, your forests and grasslands, etc., and your domesticated animals, the animals that are living in much more closer relation to humans. So you have two separate idea itself related to these animals. This is the reason why when we discuss Wildlife Protection Act, we do not talk about the pets, we do not talk about stray dog issue or anything over there, primarily because we have a separate law to maintain the kind of clarity when it comes to domesticated animals. So here this classification in India, for wild animals you have Wildlife Protection Act, etc. When it comes to most domesticated animals and animals living in close relation to humans, you have something called as your Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Okay? Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, and under this PCA is where we've created a body called as Animal Welfare Board of India. Got it? So here it's quite clear that first statement is wrong. It's created under your Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. The first statement is wrong. If the first statement is wrong, it ends up with us having 2 and 3 and 2 only, which concludes the fact that yes, 2 is correct. They are saying that National Tiger Conservation Authority is a statutory body. Statutory means what? It is a body created from a law. Which is the law? The law over here is Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Okay. So that statement is correct. By default, from the question itself, we get that the statement is correct. Now coming to the third statement, National Ganga River Basin Authority, those who are aware and who've been preparing for exam from a really long time know that this is a body that is right now not there. It was dissolved in 2016. Okay. Until then, you had the National Ganga River Basin Authority, and at that point, the Prime Minister was chairing the committee also. The entire authority's functions were all overlooked by the Prime Minister. So, this statement is also correct. The answer to your question over here is B, 2 and 3 only. Moving forward, we have a question from 2014. The question reads as, with reference to eco-sensitive zones, which of the following statements are correct? First of all, the eco-sensitive zones are the areas that are declared under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. This is the first statement given. The purpose of the declaration of eco-sensitive zones is to prohibit all kinds of human activities in those zones except agriculture. There are only 2 statements given to this. So, when it comes to the eco-sensitive zones, this is something, and if we start discussing about it, it might take a really long time, but I'll try to summarize it and tell you. See, your Wildlife Protection Act tries to create certain protected areas. So, your national parks, your wildlife sanctuaries, tiger reserves, community reserves, conservation reserves, all of those are created under your Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. Okay, so those areas are completely protected and with different regulations over there. That job is already done. When it comes to the Environmental Protection Act, what they try to do is, see, so the protected area is already whose responsibility? Wildlife Protection Act's responsibility. The Environment Protection Act, they try to do some kind of a regulation in areas closely related to your protected area. Closely related means from the boundary of a national park or a wildlife sanctuary or a tiger reserve, they determine certain kilometers into it, and they said not into it in sense away from it, and they tried to say that, okay, let's try to regulate the activities. Okay. Now, I want you to think 1 minute and think about that first statement. So, is that first statement correct? No. So, eco-sensitive zone, which is beyond the area of protected areas, is not declared under the Wildlife Protection Act, but instead, it's declared under your Environment Protection Act of 1986. So, the first statement is wrong. Coming to the second statement, this is where you have to use your common sense. They are saying the purpose of the declaration of eco-sensitive zones is to prohibit all kinds of human activities in those zones except agriculture. Now, you think and tell me, already a protected area is completely protected. Okay, you have human activities close to nil over there. If it's a national park, absolutely nil human activities. Already humans cannot inhabit over there. Now, even if this eco-sensitive zone, we are saying humans cannot inhabit, what will you do to the several thousands and lakhs of tribal population living in these areas, mainland population that are dependent on these forest areas? Where will you rehabilitate them to? So, can you ban all human activities in these areas? No. Eco-sensitive zones was actually created to maybe create some area like a buffer zone. Buffer means any kind of activity that is happening in, this might be an area with very high human activity. You have the eco-sensitive zone which is having lesser human activity, and then you have the protected area. The idea of the eco-sensitive zone is so much so that this activities which are happening in very high population areas, their impact should not be felt directly on the protected areas. If there is an area in between, okay, now for example, there is a factory over here. If the eco-sensitive zone was not there, the impact of that factory's fumes or pollution or something will be directly on the protected area. But now there is an eco-sensitive zone in the middle. So, if you have the eco-sensitive zone, it will only have the impact over here and much lesser impact on the protected area. So, the eco-sensitive zone is a buffer area, and this is where you can understand here when it comes to this, both the statements are wrong. The answer to this question is neither one nor two. Moving over, we have a question from 2012. The question from 2012 reads as, how does National Biodiversity Authority help in the Indian agriculture? Now, I just told you about NBA. Right. So, I told you it's a 3-tier body and everything. So, the top tier, you have your NBA. Let's look at what are the statements. NBA checks biopiracy and protects the indigenous and traditional genetic resources. NBA directly monitors and supervises the scientific research on genetic modification of crop plants. Application for intellectual property rights related to genetic or biological resources cannot be made without the approval of NBA. 4 statements are given over there. Before I discuss anything about the statement, I want you to understand 2 major terms. There is a term called as biopiracy. Okay, and there's another term called as biosafety. And though it has bio and all together with it, these are 2 drastically different terms. Biopiracy means you are exploiting some natural resources, some traditional knowledge, anything without giving those who's owning that area, of whoever is cultivating that certain natural resource, you're not paying them anything, you're not giving them any credit, you're not giving them any benefits. In that way, when you extract any kind of natural resources, it's called as biopiracy. Biosafety, on the other hand, means that because of some natural resource or because of some genetically modified crop or anything, you are doing something, creating a biological component that is likely to affect the environment, the health, the people in that specific area. This is your biosafety. Got it? Now, again, to stress on this fact, these terms are so different, so much so that in India, biopiracy is dealt by the Biological Diversity Act, and biosafety is dealt by the Environment Protection Act of 1986. Got it? It's that different. Okay. Now, when you look at the three statements given over here, two statements in this relate primarily to your biopiracy. The question is about National Biodiversity Authority. I told you that is related to which act? Biological Diversity Act. Now, I want you to think and tell me which is the statement which is not going to be there in your biopiracy. If you look at statement 2, they are reading directly as NBA directly monitors and supervises the scientific research on genetic modification of crop plants. This is primarily a concern with respect to biosafety. And it is coming under the Environment Protection Act, and it is dealt by another body called as GEAC, Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, which was created under the Environment Protection Act. Which means what? Here when you look at these statements, only your statement 1 and statement 3 are correct. The answer to the question is C.